If you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the business of lifelong learning, you're in the right place. I'm Celisa Steele.
And I'm Jeff Cobb, and this is the Leading Learning Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to episode 131 of the Leading Learning Podcast. In this episode, we're going to turn our focus to leadership once again. And to do that, we'll be talking with executive coach Christie Berger. But before diving into the conversation with Christie, we want to acknowledge our sponsor for the second quarter of 2018.
Our sponsor this quarter is Review My LMS, which is a collaboration between our company, Tagoras, and 100 Reviews, and that's the company behind the very successful Review My AMS site. As the name suggests, Review My LMS is a place where users can share and access reviews of learning management systems, but in this case, the focus is specifically on systems that are a good fit for learning businesses, meaning organizations that market and sell lifelong learning. If you contribute a review, you get access to all existing and future reviews, and there are already more than 100 reviews on the site. And if you don't have a review to contribute, there's also a subscription option. So go to reviewmylms.com to get the details.
Definitely do visit Review My LMS, but now let's get back to the main event for this episode. And Celisa, you had the chance to talk with Christie Berger, and I know leadership was one big focus of the conversation, but if I remember correctly, Christie actually comes out of a learning and development background and brings that lens to leadership. Can you give listeners a bit of a preview or maybe a pre-listen is really the best way to put that?
Well, you do remember correctly. She does have an L&D background, and I think that grounding that she had in learning and development is something that she's brought to what she's now doing in the leadership arena, because I know that one of the things she does with executives is basically develop a learning plan. And we talk a little bit about some of the similarities she sees across different engagements with leaders. We talk too about some of the common mistakes or missteps that leaders can make. And we also dive into women in leadership specifically, because that's an area that Christie's chosen to focus on. She's created some peer networks of women leaders that are supporting one another in advancing themselves as leaders and advancing the organizations that you serve. So all in all, it was a fun, good conversation.
Well, I like Christie's approach to leadership and her approach to coaching around leadership. I know that listeners are going to get a lot out of this episode, so let's roll the interview with Christie Berger.
Hello out there, I'm Celisa Steele, and this is the Leading Learning Podcast, and today I'm talking with Christie Berger. Christie is an executive coach with a broad base of experience in leadership coaching, group facilitation, executive coaching, training, and business development. Christie, welcome to the Leading Learning Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
And so to start us off, I want to give you the chance to add to that brief introduction I just gave. What else would you have listeners know about yourself and your work?
Well, in addition to what you said there, I think you did a great job summarizing it. My main focus in my work is working with leaders and organizations to help them accelerate their performance and create more value within their organizations and communities. That's done a lot of times within a one-on-one context of an in-depth executive coaching engagement. In addition to that, I do some team facilitation work and some group coaching. But really, it's around the learning process for leaders.
Well, and that's great, since this is the Leading Learning Podcast, and I am particularly interested in that learning angle of what you do. And I know that before focusing on executive coaching, that you served as a learning and development manager for Simplex Healthcare, and you dealt with things like effective onboarding and employee engagement and leadership development there. I mean, so you've been in the shoes of some of our listeners who are very hands-on in L&D. So I'm curious as to how you see the connection between learning and leadership, between learning and the leadership coaching that you do.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been on the inside within organizations with, like you mentioned there, in the L&D space and OD space, and now being on the external side, I get to almost peek into all these different organizations where they are challenged with ensuring that their leaders are constantly learning. The combination there, the way I look at leadership, I think effective leaders, especially in this day and age, have to put ongoing learning as a priority. And you have to keep learning in order to lead effectively, because the landscape is changing, whether it be within the business itself or within the role transitions that people take. And it's going to be very important to step back and say, what does success look like in the business? What does success look like for the leaders in their positions, and create those success profiles and learning plans to meet the needs in order to create the most value for the business.
And talk a little bit about what those learning plans tend to look like. I mean, do you find that most leaders are making use of a mix of kind of formal learning experiences like, workshops and seminars, and they're doing kind of more self-directed learning where they're, looking at podcasts and blogs and books that are out there? Or, what type of resources do leaders tend to look to?
That's wonderful. And I think it's a combination. Ideally, it would be in tandem with, the learning and development folks within the organizations, that they would be a partnership with the leaders, the hypos, and those in the highest level leading positions. A lot of times it is taken, with the formal aspect of learning, whether it be in trainings or workshops, or organizations that send their leaders to more in-depth learning opportunities within university settings and such. As an executive coach, my main focus is to say, how do leaders create their own learning agenda, and how do we use a hybrid approach of self-directed learning versus utilizing those classes, whether it be internal or external, as part of their learning to ultimately meet the learning needs and learning goals that they set forth. And a lot of times those are identified through assessments, through the success profiles of their roles. And that's something that I work with leaders on pretty much every engagement, is to identify what that is. And we craft a customized approach to meet those learning needs.
That's great. So a very personalized, customized approach to it. I know, too, that influence is something that you see as very important when it comes to leadership. I think probably more important than the kind of role-based authority that leaders sometimes have because of their position title. Would you talk a little bit about what creates influence and how you might help a coachee become a person of influence or of greater influence?
The ability to influence is going to be key for leaders to be successful, as well as individual contributors. I think regardless of the level that one serves in an organization, the ability to influence is extremely important. What do leaders need to do to become more influential? I think the first and foremost is to take stock of where their role is within the organization. What does their role require of them, and who does it touch within the organization? One way of doing this is I have my leaders, or those that I coach, create a relational map. I think relational capital is more important, than what you mentioned there, is the position of authority or your role. I think if people can get a better understanding of those key points within the organization, and what matters to those other folks within be different departments within their team, they can create and craft their messaging, their resources in order to help support those folks and what they need. So being able to do that is to have also a better understanding. That's kind of looking external, right, to the organization and the agendas and the key folks that influence across the organization. But the other way is, how do they get better with their interpersonal relationships? And I think key to influence is having a genuine mindset of learning and of service. I think when you do that and without an agenda, people can pick up on that, and their ability to be influenced, so to speak, or be in collaboration with you is going to be key to being able to be influential.
So it's kind of that motivation that you bring to a particular exchange. Like you're saying, if you don't necessarily bring a firm agenda, but you're open to this idea of let me see what I can learn. Let me see what we can do to advance our common goal, that's can be key then to getting people to respond in a positive way.
Yeah, I think influence is one of those terms. It's kind of, when you get back from, like, say, a 360 assessment, or at the beginning of a coaching engagement, we do an alignment of saying, whether it be with, an L&D person or HR person and that leader's immediate supervisor, it's be more influential or be more strategic. And then the leader's left going, what in the world does that mean? And so, we have to break it down in terms that people can grasp behaviorally. And with being influential, or in leadership in general, I think it's important to look at those key behaviors and skills that one needs to work on. But even before we do that, we have to look at our mindset of how we define leadership. How do we define what it means to be influential? And it may be different depending on your role and depending on the culture within your organization. So, part of that in a coaching relationship anyway is to partner with the leader to start to define what that means for them and what that means within their context and their organization. And then we can start to peel the layers back to say, okay, what are the behaviors that's going to drive you to be more influential? In other words, and create more of that relational capital. I always say, to be able to influence others, how many deposits have you put in the bank over the course of, the last few years? A lot of times, unfortunately, leaders wait till they're promoted to a certain position, and then they have the responsibility of creating and driving a strategic vision. And the key to being able to do that successfully is you have to have people bought in. People have to want to hear what you're saying and connect with what you're saying. And unfortunately, leaders wait until they get in those positions before they create that relational capital. So one key thing, is working with those leaders to say, you need to be putting those deposits in the bank. Once we work on that relationship map or throughout the organization and we start to build those relationships, we put those deposits in the bank, so to speak. So when you are in a position where you need to influence, you can make a withdrawal, right? And so, that's something I know that's kind of a different metaphor for this, but it helps people understand and relate to what it really means to influence others and how do they do that effectively.
Yeah, that's great. I like the idea of relational capital, running with that metaphor and that idea of putting deposits in the bank. You mentioned when we were talking about learning plans just a little bit, and then just in your last few comments around talking about kind of this idea of working with individual leaders to think about, what influence means to them. And so it sounds like there's a lot that comes down to working to customize the approach with a particular leader. But I'm wondering, that aside, if there are kind of ideas or actions that tend to improve leadership regardless of the particular individuals or organizations involved. Is there low-hanging leadership fruit, so to speak?
Yeah, there is. I'd say, I work in the last 10 years or so in coaching, I've worked in all kinds of different industries and fields and at different levels within the organization. And there are a few key components that I think for the majority of times translates regardless. And I think one of those is what I referenced to a while ago, is the mindset. I really like to build a foundation of what would be considered a learning mindset, being curious, not being dogmatic in your thinking or thinking you have to be right, and really moving that pendulum from that judging to that learner. And once we do that, regardless of your role, our ability to influence and collaborate with others is going to be greater. So that's one foundational piece of that. Another, I guess, low-hanging fruit, so to speak, is that, we don't work in isolation. Regardless, even if you are a solopreneur, you're not working in isolation, you're working with others. So I think it's really important to say relationships are very important. And how do you establish that? A lot of times leaders, are in their role and they have their department and they have their team, and they become very myopic in interacting with their team or their department. And the key is going to be around seeing the value and the importance of networking across the organization as well as outside of the organization. I work with so many leaders that say, just don't have time for that. Just don't have time for that. And I think that's unfortunate because we got to help them see the value of that. And one of the reasons, I think is very key as you move up in an organization is you've got to expand your sources of information in order to be strategic, in order to see trends within your business and outside of your business in your market. You have to be exposing yourself. You have to be learning. You have to be taking in information, whether it be, from great podcasts like this or, going to different associations, different conferences, but expanding your network, expanding your sources of influence and information so you can be more creative and you can be more strategic, which, with the fast pace of change today, I think it's vital for leaders to do that to be effective.
All right. So you hit on both kind of this mindset, this idea of, moving out of being too dogmatic, too judgmental, being curious, being a learner, and then this idea too of being really aware of the relationships and both internally and externally, and that those are often a great source for learning as well. So you hit on sort of learning in both of those aspects that you commented on. I'm wondering on kind of the flip side of that, if you tend to see common mistakes in leadership, again, sort of regardless of the individuals or organizations involved, do we all tend to make the same types of missteps?
Great question. And I would say, everyone's unique. I have to say in that sense, I'll put that out there first. That said, one of the common mistakes that people make, and especially successful people, is that they tend to think what has made them successful in previous roles or previous companies is going to automatically make them successful in their new role or when they transition to a new organization. I think it's so important to do what I would call a leadership audit, and that would then tie into the learning agenda and learning plan later down the line. But by going in and listening and being reflective, auditing, what are the skills that are needed and the mindset that is needed for the role today or the business today is going to be really important. Unfortunately, success breeds the thinking that those skills and the approaches that one has taken previously are automatically going to translate. And especially as you move up the leadership pipeline, a lot of times people and leaders that have been very successful, I'll get a chance to work with them and they're very frustrated. They're at the point of, the organization's questioning their decision. And when we peel it back a little bit, it's really because they haven't stepped back to reassess what's needed in the new role, things that they have to let go of, skills they have to acquire, and being able to negotiate and get clear on what the expectations are for the role that they're in today. I think that would be a common mistake regardless of the organization or the function. All
right. So that idea of, what got you where you are may not get you where you need to go or want to go.
Marshall Goldsmith. Yeah. What got you here won't get you there. Yeah. But, it's so simplistic and we kind of laugh, we got that and that makes sense, but it's so surprising that, maybe not surprising, I guess with the pacing and everything else, just to slow down and be reflective on that is something that is extremely important. And I think where, people or leaders can fail is when they're not stepping back and assessing that and partnering with their, learning and development department or their HR department and with their immediate supervisor to really outline what does the success mean for me today? What does success look like in this role? And then working backwards to say, what are the behaviors, the skills, and the mindset that I need to acquire or utilize in order to be successful?
Because then you can go out and learn those. You can focus on those skills and behaviors you need to add to your repertoire.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing to this is that, I find it funny. This isn't the norm, but a lot of times when I'm working with leaders around identifying kind of how they've approached learning and how they've made learning a priority prior to our engagement, is asking them around, like, what have they been reading, or what articles has resonated with them, or things like that. And unfortunately, I'm at the place today that, there are times that, very senior leaders go, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. And I'm going, oh no, it's that red flag, like, oh no, we have to, as learning leaders in organizations, or external, coaches like myself, really have to help those that we work with and those in our organizations see how they can integrate learning. And it is not reading War and Peace, it's not this huge. And I had a client, send me a picture of that, and kind of joking. I said, but we got to build that muscle up and make it a priority of how do we integrate learning and micro learning. It can be in small chunks, and figuring out what that needs to be and customize that for those leaders so they can build that muscle up to where it becomes a norm.
Yeah, it can be that irony of the shoemaker's children who go shoeless, sort of thing, where you have the learning professionals sometimes who aren't able to sort of give attention to their own learning, but how that can be so fundamentally important, so critical if they're going to be successful.
Yes.
So I know that you work with both men and women in your one-on-one coaching, but I know that you've also created an executive development opportunity specifically for women leaders. And so I would love to hear a little bit about the Fusion Leader Circuits, what they are, and what prompted you to create them.
Oh, well, with the Fusion Leader Circuits really came about very organically. I did not set out to create a program for women leaders in isolation. The way it came about is through conversations with those that I had worked with in one-on-one settings, which honestly, I work with more men. It's a sheer numbers game. There's more men in senior leadership positions. That's unfortunately the way it is today, and hopefully we'll continue to move the needle in a more positive direction. But what I was finding with those women that I did work with is that there were some common developmental themes, regardless of their function, regardless of their industry. And after talking with a few of those here, at least in my market, I felt like I was in a unique position to bring them together. And as I was doing my benchmarking here in the Nashville area, there really wasn't a program for women at the level that I was working with that was really focused on their unique needs. So I put together a coaching, and it's really based on a group coaching foundation and a group coaching model to bring these women together that are from all different kind of industries, different functions, because ultimately they have different learning needs. There were certain things that, that probably were not going to get or have addressed within their organizations. For many of them, they were the only woman at the seat of the table, within the executive leadership teams, and they were having certain challenges, but they didn't have anywhere to go. So created this program to connect these women, to have a neutral place to explore some of the opportunities and challenges from a developmental standpoint, in a way for learning, in addition to build community. A lot of sponsorship and a lot of mentoring, just because of the numbers, are mainly, I hate to say this, but it's still the good old boys network in some places, not in all. And so create more community and opportunity for networking among senior leaders, women leaders specifically. Now, that's not to say we don't need men. We need men to be a part of the conversation. We need men to sponsor women, because that has been shown to be one of the most effective ways to have women become or gain access to some of the more senior level positions in organizations. So, creating this circuit, and the whole concept of the circuit is movement. So we move in our sessions, whether it be a speaker session or a group coaching session, we are moving around the city so we can expose the members and the participants to different organizations, increase their awareness around what else is out there in our community.
Well, I think that's really great. I like that there's the emphasis on that sort of peer learning, that community of practice, bringing people together who have the similar opportunities and challenges. And I also like the length of it. I mean, it's a year-long commitment. Is that correct?
That is correct. And there's intention around that. We don't get together. Our sessions are, I would say, short enough, 2 to 3 hours every other month. And then in the off months, we have either a private session with a key leader in our community, an opportunity for them to hear their story and how they've gone through different difficulties or challenges. And so it's done that way to create that depth. Depth of learning, depth of relationship. So when the program ends, I may be out of the picture, but my hope is that they have a community to lean into and to share resources, and that lives on way past the program.
Well, I think if I have the timing right, that you launched the Fusion Leader Circuits before the Me Too movement really gained momentum. But I'm wondering if you have thoughts about women leaders in this sort of era of the Me Too movement.
Yeah, this can be a touchy subject. I had the wonderful opportunity to hear Tarana Burke speak only probably about a month ago here in Nashville, and I was educated on the origination of the Me Too movement, and it really is about survivorship, and the way it has been utilized in more of the work settings and things like that is wonderful. I think it's really, really good. And we need to have a voice, and everyone needs to be treated equally, regardless of your gender or your race or anything. And we need to value the diversity. I will say that there has to be mindfulness of utilizing that construct in a positive way. I just mentioned a while ago is that sponsorship and mentorship is key for having diversity in our leadership positions, and just again the sheer numbers. Men are in those roles of the highest level of leadership, and we need them to feel comfortable in supporting our women. And I read something recently, that some are uncertain in how to do that. And I think they just need to have courage and everyone have courage to reach out and say, how do we embrace diversity? How do we support our women and our high potentials regardless, and ensuring that we are supporting them to reach the next level of leadership. So, with the Me Too movement, I fully support it. As long as it's being taken in the right construct. Mm.
Well, so I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and ask about, advice that you might have for our listeners, who are these leaders and aspiring leaders in the business of lifelong learning. Let's say they're looking to, take their business to higher performance, better returns, financial and in terms of the results that they're producing. And I'm wondering what advice you would have for those leaders and those aspiring leaders. Maybe it's the same advice, maybe it's different for the aspiring leaders versus the established leaders, but what thoughts do you have?
I think about your audience there, and it would resonate, probably be very similar for both aspiring and existing, is that you really are putting yourself first. I think for some of the learning leaders is always about helping other people be successful. I think it's just as important as to how do you nurture your own learning and in order to be even of more service to those that you work with. I think the idea of goal setting, I know that seems a little elementary, but to be able to say, what is it that I need? What does the next year, 3 years look like? Now, we can identify those, but we don't want to be so focused on them that we can't see other opportunities that may come up that we would never have seen before. So I think there is this need to be kind of fluid in that, is set our goals, understand and plan for those things, but also be open to something that's unexpected.
And that idea of putting yourself first, of nurturing your own learning, that just reminds me of the airline stewards, and you put on your own oxygen mask first, and then you can help the others around you.
Yes.
And so the next to last question here as we're winding up, this is a question that we like to ask of everyone who comes on the Leading Learning podcast, and it focuses on your personal learning specifically. And so I would love to hear what's been one of the most powerful learning experiences that you've been involved in as an adult since finishing your formal education.
Well, I think probably like most of your listeners is I'm a junkie for learning. I absolutely love learning. I love reading. I would say some of the most impactful is that I did a program through the Neuro Leadership Institute, which was extremely fascinating, and it was their brain-based coaching certification. And I've done a few different coaching certifications, and there was just something about this program that really helped open my eyes up when we think about learning and looking at it not just from, the construct of skills and, motivations and the psychology piece, but really looking at it from the biology and how the brain works and how our body works and how hormones and all those things play a part into setting the stage for optimal learning, and how do we build new habits and let go of those that no longer serve us. I think that was a great, more formal learning experience. Now, on the informal side, I'd say, I have been committed to pushing myself out of my comfort zone, even when I am wanting to run away. And, it's been something I haven't done before. And I just, every inch of my actual body wants to go the other direction. And, and I look at that now today as a sign that I need to keep moving forward. That is a sign that I'm growing. And so I've learned to seek those out, that if I am not feeling uncomfortable, or it's been a little while since I've been uncomfortable, then I need to push the envelope a little bit and seek out new opportunities. So that's something for me personally that I've learned over the years, and that's been very helpful. I'm very fortunate, Salisa, that I get to work in some of the greatest organizations, but more importantly, with some of the most successful leaders that are doing really great things, and I get to work one-on-one, and I'm challenged by them every day. These are extremely smart, extremely confident, a lot of times, individuals, and so I look at each opportunity that I get to work with these leaders and those that help serve them as opportunities for me to learn.
That's great. I think that's wonderful to recognize that sometimes even when you're in the role of the leader or coaching the leader, that there's still a lot that you can learn out of the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important, especially for those learning leaders that are responsible for helping, support the growth of their organizations and the leaders in their learning agendas, that we have to model what we want and what we're teaching or what we're suggesting. And we have to have that humility and confidence to do it in the moment at times. At least someone in my position, I need to be able to walk the talk and push myself. If I'm going to suggest that, someone with an extremely busy schedule, read a new article or try out a new behavior, that I've got to be doing that myself.
Take your own medicine.
You got it.
So final question is, if listeners want to know more about your work, where should they go?
The easiest way to reach me or learn more about my work is on my website, and that's cb@christieberger.com. You can connect with me there, reach out to me there. In addition, you can find me on LinkedIn, either one.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Christie. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much.
That wraps up our interview with Christie Berger. To get show notes for this episode, just go to leadinglearning.com/episode 131.
And while you're there, you're going to see various options for subscribing to the podcast. And if you're getting value out of what you hear, we would be grateful if you would subscribe.
We'd also be grateful if you take just a minute to give us a rating or review on iTunes. To get there, all you have to do is go to leadinglearning.com/iTunes, and that'll put you in the right place.
And we really do need you to go and give us a review and a rating. We can't rely on other people to do it. We need you to go out there and do that. It really would help. And we would be grateful if you would also take a minute to visit our sponsor for this quarter, Review My LMS. Jeff and I put a lot of work into producing and delivering the Leading Learning podcast, and one of the reasons we're able to do that is because we're able to generate revenue through other sources like Review My LMS. So please visit reviewmylms.com, and if you can, contribute a review to help others find the right platform for their needs.
Last but certainly not least, please consider telling others about the podcast. You can do that through social networks by going to leadinglearning.com/share, and that's going to pop up a tweet that you can just click to send out. Or if tweeting isn't your thing, you can pick another social network, use that same language, and put it into LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever your network of preference is, but please spread the good word.
Thanks again, and see you next time on the Leading Learning podcast.